Welcome back to Smiles and Scars, the place where untold stories, raw emotions, and unforgettable battles of courage come alive. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's an experience. It all began in a quiet suburban town, one of those places where people thought racism was buried and forgotten, but in reality, it lingered like a shadow. Steven Seagal's daughter, Emily, was a gentle soul with her father's sharp instincts, but her mother's kindness. She loved volunteering at local shelters, helping children, and living a peaceful life away from the violence her father had always lived through. One summer afternoon, Emily walked through the town square. It was warm, the sun was dipping into the horizon, and the streets were filled with people wrapping up their day. But in the corner near the coffee shop, a police cruiser sat with its sirens off. Inside, two officers were arguing over something trivial. One of them, Officer Randall, was a known bully. He had a record of racist remarks, unnecessary aggression, and abusing his badge whenever he wanted to feel powerful. As Emily passed by, she noticed Randall glaring at her. She kept walking, ignoring him. But for a man like Randall, being ignored was an insult. He got out of the cruiser, his boots hitting the pavement with arrogance. "Hey, girl," he barked. "Where do you think you're going so fast? Don't you know you're supposed to stop when an officer talks to you?" Emily froze. She hadn't done anything wrong. "I'm just going home," she said calmly, but Randall wasn't interested in her answer. He smirked, leaning closer. "You think you're better than everyone else around here, huh? With your daddy's name and his reputation. Let me tell you something. Your father ain't here now." Before she could even react, he clenched his fist and with sudden violence punched her across the face. The sound echoed through the square like a gunshot. Emily stumbled, crashing to the ground, her palms scraping against the rough pavement. Gasps erupted from the bystanders, but nobody dared to move. They knew Officer Randall, and they knew what happened to people who crossed him. Emily lay there, stunned, blood trickling from her lip. Her heart pounded, not just from the pain, but from the disbelief that someone sworn to protect could turn into a predator. She whispered under her breath, "Dad." But fate had something different in store that day. From across the street, a figure stepped out of a diner. His boots clicked against the floor with calm precision. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Emily on the ground. His beard caught the glow of the setting sun, and there was no mistaking who he was. Chuck Norris. He had been in town quietly visiting an old friend, keeping a low profile. But Chuck wasn't the kind of man who stood by when injustice stared him in the face. The crowd seemed to sense the shift in the air, like the presence of a storm. Randall didn't notice him at first. He laughed cruelly, nudging Emily with his boot. "Look at you now. Your daddy's name can't save you. You're nothing." That was the moment Chuck stepped closer, his voice calm but edged with fire. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Randall turned, scoffing. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Chuck's eyes didn't waver. "The man who's going to teach you respect." The crowd whispered, half in fear, half in awe. They knew Chuck Norris. Everyone did. But Randall, blinded by arrogance, laughed. "What are you gonna do, old man? This is police business. Walk away before I have to make you." Chuck's jaw tightened. He wasn't just defending Emily. He was standing against every ounce of corruption Randall represented. He moved forward, standing between Emily and the officer. Emily looked up through teary eyes and recognized him instantly. "Mr. Norris," she whispered. Chuck gave her a reassuring nod, his voice low so only she could hear. "Don't worry, kid. You're safe now." Randall swung his fist recklessly, trying to assert dominance, but Chuck's reflexes were sharper than ever. He blocked the punch with ease, his arm like a wall of steel. The shock in Randall's face was priceless. Then, in one swift motion, Chuck countered with a strike, precise, controlled, and devastating. His fist connected with Randall's chest, sending him stumbling back like a rag doll. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts. Phones came out, cameras recording. Justice was finally being witnessed, but it didn't stop there. Randall's partner tried to step in, pulling out his baton. "Back off, Norris. You're interfering with police authority." Chuck turned, his gaze like fire. "This isn't authority. This is abuse." Before the baton could swing, Chuck twisted his body, delivering a kick that knocked the weapon clean out of the officer's hand. The man fell to the ground, wind knocked out of him. Emily slowly got to her feet, her cheeks swollen but her spirit rising. She watched as Chuck Norris, one of the greatest martial artists alive, fought not for glory but for her, for justice. The crowd began chanting, some recording, some shouting at the officers. "You can't do that. She's innocent. We saw everything." Randall, humiliated, scrambled back to his feet. Rage burned in his eyes. "You think you can touch a cop and walk away? You're finished, Norris." But Chuck's calm never wavered. He cracked his knuckles slowly, his voice steady as a mountain. "The only one finished here is you." And with that, the fight escalated. Randall charged again, swinging wildly, but Chuck dodged every move with effortless precision. Years of training, discipline, and battles across the world had honed his body into a weapon. Each block, each counterstrike was poetry in motion. The crowd cheered, their fear dissolving into awe. Finally, Chuck landed the blow that ended it, a single, devastating punch straight to Randall's jaw. The officer dropped to the ground, unconscious, his arrogance shattered in the dirt. The square went silent for a moment, then erupted in cheers. Emily, holding her cheek, whispered, "Thank you." Chuck placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. "Your father raised you strong. Don't let this scar you. Let it remind you that there are still people who will fight for what's right." But Chuck knew this wasn't over. The department would come after him. The system would try to protect its own. Yet deep inside he welcomed the challenge, because men like Randall weren't just bullies. They were a disease, and Chuck Norris had just declared war on them. The story had only just begun. The street was eerily silent after the shocking moment when the racist cop's punch landed on Steven Seagal's daughter. Time seemed frozen. Her body staggered back, her hand clutching her face as tears welled up from both pain and humiliation. Gasps echoed from bystanders, and the air grew heavy with tension. For an instant, it looked like the world had forgotten to breathe. Then came the sound of boots, heavy, certain, and unmistakably resolute. Chuck Norris stepped forward from the shadows of the sidewalk, his eyes burning with fury. His presence was like a thunderclap, electrifying the moment. Everyone knew his reputation, but in that split second, the racist officer had no clue what storm he had invited upon himself. Chuck's gaze shifted from the wounded girl to the officer who had raised his hand against her. The look in Chuck's eyes was not just anger, it was justice incarnate. The officer smirked, still drunk on arrogance and authority. "Stay back, old man," he barked, puffing his chest. "This is police business. She deserved it for disrespecting me." His words slithered like venom across the stunned crowd. But Chuck took one deliberate step closer, his fists curling ever so slightly, the knuckles whitening. "She's Steven Seagal's daughter," Chuck growled, his voice low but sharp as steel. "And more importantly, she's a human being. You just crossed a line you can't come back from." The cop laughed mockingly, unaware that death itself might have been safer than mocking Chuck Norris. "Steven Seagal, don't care who she is. Nobody tells me what to do." He reached for his baton, twirling it arrogantly. The crowd murmured in anticipation. Phones were raised to record. Some whispered, "It's Chuck Norris. This guy has no idea who he's dealing with." Others simply held their breath, waiting for the storm to break. Chuck didn't waste another word. The moment the cop raised the baton to swing, Chuck's hand shot out with blinding speed. In a blink, the baton was ripped from the officer's grip and tossed clattering across the pavement. The cop staggered, died, realizing for the first time that he had just lost control of the situation. Then it happened. Chuck's fist shot forward, clean and brutal, slamming into the officer's jaw with the force of a hammer. The sound cracked through the street like a gunshot. The cop's body lifted off his feet and crashed into the side of his squad car before collapsing to the ground in a heap. Silence followed, a silence thick with awe. The girl gasped, clutching her face as relief washed over her. Chuck immediately turned, his features softening as he crouched beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded weakly, tears spilling over. I didn't think anyone would stop him. You're safe now," Chuck said, his tone reassuring, though his eyes flicked back toward the cop, who was groaning and trying to rise. "No one touches you again, not while I'm here." But the cop wasn't finished. Fueled by shame and rage, he spat blood on the pavement and snarled, "You think one punch will stop me? I'll have your badge, old man. I'll have your head." He fumbled for his holstered weapon, fingers trembling. The crowd gasped again as the gun was drawn. But before anyone could scream, Chuck moved like lightning. His boot lashed out, a swift roundhouse kick that sent the gun flying into the night. The weapon clattered uselessly across the asphalt. In the same motion, Chuck's second fist slammed into the cop's gut, knocking the breath clean out of him. The officer collapsed, gagging, clutching his stomach. "Learn this," Chuck said, standing tall, his voice echoing with finality. "The badge doesn't make you a man. How you treat people does, and you've failed." At that moment, headlights flared in the distance. A black SUV rolled up, its engine growling like a beast. The driver's door opened, and the crowd collectively gasped again. Steven Seagal stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating controlled fury. His face was stone, his steps deliberate. His daughter's eyes widened with relief as she cried out, "Dad!" Steven rushed to her side, his arm wrapping protectively around her. He gently touched her bruised cheek, his jaw tightening as the reality sank in. He looked at Chuck, then at the beaten cop crumpled on the ground. "Did he do this?" Steven's voice was low, dangerous, every syllable like the click of a cocked pistol. Chuck nodded once. "He did, and I made sure he'll never forget it." Steven turned his glare to the cop, who was trembling now, his earlier bravado shattered. "You laid hands on my daughter," Steven said, his tone calm but icy. "That's not something you walk away from," the cop stammered. I didn't know who she was." Steven stepped closer, towering over him, his presence suffocating. "You didn't need to know who she was," he snapped. "All you needed to know was that she's a person, and you disgraced your badge when you forgot that." The officer tried to crawl backward, but Steven's boot pressed firmly onto his chest, pinning him to the ground. The crowd's phones captured every second. The chants began, low at first, then rising in strength. "Justice, justice, justice." Chuck placed a hand on Steven's shoulder. "He's broken already," he said quietly. "Don't let his darkness stain you. We've shown him enough." Steven hesitated, then looked down at his daughter, whose tearful eyes pleaded silently for him to stop. With a final shove of his boot, he stepped back. The cop lay sprawled, coughing and humiliated, his career and pride shattered in the eyes of everyone watching. Police sirens wailed in the distance, backup rushing in, but when they arrived, they didn't see a heroic cop. They saw one of their own disgraced, beaten, and exposed. The crowd's phones told the story, witnesses spoke the truth. The racist cop was arrested on the spot, cuffed by his own colleagues, his head bowed in shame. Steven kissed his daughter's forehead, his arm still around her. "You're safe now," he whispered. Chuck nodded with a faint smile. Sometimes the hardest punches are the ones life delivers to those who deserve it. The crowd erupted in applause, not just for the fight, but for the message. Two legends had stood for justice, and no amount of corruption could erase that moment. As Steven guided his daughter toward the SUV, Chuck lingered a moment longer, his eyes scanning the humbled officer being dragged away. "Let this be a reminder," he said softly, almost to himself. "Evil always underestimates the strength of good men." The night closed in, but for everyone who witnessed it, the memory would burn like fire. The night a racist cop punched the wrong person's daughter and found justice in the fists of Chuck Norris and the shadow of Steven Seagal.